And good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning. Welcome back to Morning Musings. This is video number 8 in our examination of the view of Dr. N.T. Wright in his view of the redemption of creation. Now, let me state again what I have said on other occasions. What N.T. Wright believes about the redemption of the creation is not at all unique. It's not idiosyncratic. My library has a large number of books in it of men who believe that one day there will be a literal physical recreation, a purging of the current world, followed by a new physical creation. As a matter of fact, this particular book, God's Good Earth. Now, this is a fascinating book in many, many ways. The author points out that the view that God cursed the earth, all right, carries with it some ideas that are not biblical. Now, did God curse the ground? Certainly he did, as Genesis 2 and 3 teaches us. However, what John Garvey does is he points out that there were already things in place prior to sin, prior to the cursing of the earth, that mankind is traditionally linked with the curse of the earth, but since they were pre-sin, pre-curse realities, then they were therefore part of the, quote, good creation. Fascinating in that regard. And then, of all things, he jumps ship because of his futurism. And so he imposes his futurist eschatology on some really, really good ideas. And there's a disjunction between his futurism and his views taken from the biblical text. The point being, however, that Mr. Garvey, Richard Middleton, N.T. Wright, and a host of other scholars, there is the view in the Reformed amillennial circles, there is the view of the postmillennialist, that we're looking for a time in which Christ will come back to earth and he will recreate, rejuvenate physical creation. Richard Middleton uses the term of the entire created order. N.T. Wright follows the same terminology, which means, as I have pointed out in numerous conversations with individuals who took this view, that in reality, God is going to one day, according to that view, redeem, restore, rejuvenate, revive, resurrect, whatever word you would like, the bugs, the slugs, and the mosquitoes. Now, it's fascinating to me that men like Wright, as I have already pointed out from his book on Paul, Wright talks about the rejuvenation, the recreation, the restoration of plant life. You know, thorns will be remade and recreated into something not quite as prickly, I guess. But one thing that is assiduously avoided by N.T. Wright is the context, the framework, the time that the Bible unequivocally posits for this redemption of creation. And secondarily, due to ignoring the time, N.T. Wright ignores the identity of the creation. Now, I've already pointed out to you that the Greek word katissis is used in context of salvation, in context of redemption. It is used in context that speaks of the redemption of creation, i.e., mankind. Mankind worshiped and served the creation. But it never, Romans chapter 1, but it never says that redemption that mankind was looking for, that creation was looking for, was katissis, was the creation that man was worshiping. It simply condemns men for worshiping the creation rather than the Creator. Folks, that's a huge distinction and disparity, and one that needs to be carefully observed. Now, last week we began examining Isaiah and what's known as the Little Apocalypse. And I have to tell you, this set of scriptures is some of the most amazing, fascinating, and interesting set of scriptures, and all of it related to the redemption of creation. And the reason that is true is this. In Romans chapter 8, Paul said that the creation was longing for the adoption, i.e., the redemption of our body. Now, here's something that really has to be taken into consideration. And I'll address it more as we continue. Paul said that creation was looking for the adoption. What does that mean? The adoption as sons of God. Now, when you go back to Romans chapter 8, 14 and following, Paul said, now we are children of God. And if we are children, then we are heirs and heirs of God. And he says, we have not received the spirit of fear, again, to bondage, but the spirit of adoption. So, Paul is writing to Christians who have come out of the sinful world into Christ. They have already received the spirit of adoption. And again, I'll discuss this more later. What is the nature of the katasis, the creation, that had already received the spirit of adoption? Was Paul saying that bugs, slugs, and mosquitoes had already somehow, some way, received the spirit of adoption? Clearly not. He is talking to people who had obeyed the gospel of Jesus Christ, who had once been the servants of sin, but have now become free from sin due to their obedience to the form of the doctrine of Christ. Romans 6, 16 and following. God be thanked that you once were the servants of sin, but you have obeyed from the heart that form of doctrine which was delivered to you. Being then made free from sin, you have become the servants of righteousness. And you need to see the correlation between Romans 6 and Romans chapter 8 and the spirit of adoption and the deliverance from sin. Now, my point is this. In Romans chapter 8, the katasis was longing for the adoption. The brethren to whom Paul was writing had received the spirit of adoption. And I know I'm getting ahead of myself here, but this is important stuff. What you have to understand is that Paul's writing to Rome, and adoption was a common practice. But what you had was a declaration of adoption, followed by a period of waiting, very often a down payment, and down payment is not the proper term, but a guarantee of the completion of the adoption, and finally the consummation of the adoption on the day that was set for the final judgment. And I'll share some things with you about that as we proceed. So in other words, he is not talking about one aspect of creation, katasis, having already been adopted. He is talking about an adoption process that had begun, and through the miraculous works of the Holy Spirit as the guarantee of the final adoption. And not one word about the initial adoption of bugs, slugs, and mosquitoes. But whatever the adoption was, ladies and gentlemen, it had already begun. Therefore, if the adoption, i.e. the redemption of our body, if that had anything whatsoever to do with the redemption of natural physical creation, then there should have been, already beginning in the first century, the rejuvenation, the restoration, the recreation of natural physical creation, i.e., the bugs, the slugs, and the mosquitoes. So, that's getting ahead of ourselves, but it's important. But last week we began in what is known as the little apocalypse, Isaiah 24 through 27. And I want to focus today on Isaiah chapter 26. Now please, go back and watch the video from last week, number 7, in which I demonstrated that point number 1, Isaiah 25 verse 8, foretold the resurrection. And Isaiah 25 verse 8 is one of Paul's verses that he draws from in his prediction of the resurrection of the dead in 1 Corinthians 15. When the mortal shall have put on immortality, when the corruptible shall have put on incorruptibility, then shall be brought to pass the saying, O death, where is your victory? Death is swallowed up in victory. That's Isaiah 25. So Romans chapter 8:23 is talking about the redemption of our body, as it's called. By the way, it's not our bodies, plural. It's our body, singular. But the redemption of the body, our body, of Romans 8:23 is clearly the resurrection of 1 Corinthians 15. The resurrection of 1 Corinthians 15 would be in fulfillment of Isaiah chapter 25 and verse 8. You follow that? Connecting the dots. But you see, Isaiah 25 is very clear in positing that time of the resurrection as the time, Isaiah 25, 1-3, in which the fortified city, and that's Jerusalem, and the temple would be turned over to strangers and foreigners. Now, folks, that some people try to apply Isaiah 25 to the Assyrian captivity of the 10 northern tribes. Well, that's a tempting thing. But was death swallowed up in victory at the time of the Assyrian captivity? Was the messianic banquet, the messianic wedding banquet of Isaiah 25 and verse 6 and 7, was that established so that all nations, all people of any nation could come and sit down with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom, as Jesus, appealing to Isaiah 25:6, said was going to happen? Patently not. So the resurrection of Isaiah 25 was not a restoration or a adoption and the redemption of our body. Now, mind you, when Israel was in Assyrian captivity, she was dead. She had been slain. And to be delivered from that, and the final deliverance from that, as we will see in Isaiah chapter 27, was nothing less and nothing other than resurrection. But you know what? It wasn't biological resurrection. It was not the raising of corpses out of the dirt. And since Paul was anticipating the resurrection of Isaiah 27, and again, getting ahead of myself, but since Paul was anticipating the resurrection of Isaiah 27, but Isaiah 27 was not a prediction of physical bodies coming out of the ground, and yet Paul was anticipating the redemption of our body, and the redemption of our body is the resurrection of Isaiah 27, then guess what? Romans chapter 8:23 was not anticipating a physical resurrection out of the dirt. It's not our bodies. It is the body of us, as it is rendered. So, that's a lot of preliminary, all right? So let's go to Isaiah chapter 26. Now, Isaiah 26, it says, in that day, a song will be sung in the land of Judah. In what day? The day of the resurrection and the messianic banquet of chapter 25, 6 to 8. The time when the enemies of God, under the heading, broad general heading, a symbolic heading of Moab, an inveterate historical enemy of Israel, that in these last days being predicted, and it's not literal physical Moab, it's Moab being used as a synecdoche, or as a symbol rather, of the final enemy of God being put down. You know, that's 1 Corinthians 15. So, in that day, the prophet said, we have a strong city. God will appoint salvation for our walls. This is the time of the salvation of Israel of Isaiah 25, verse 9 and 10. This is our God. We have waited for him. He will save us. The time of the salvation of Israel, which is Romans chapter 11, 26 and 27. I have to go on. So I want you to notice something very quickly. Verse 9. With my soul I have desired you in the night. Yes, my spirit within me longs for you, and I will seek you early. Now watch this. Please catch the power of this. For when your judgments are in the earth, what judgment? The judgment to bring salvation. The judgment to bring resurrection. For when your judgments are in the earth, the inhabitants of the earth will learn righteousness. So God would act. He would bring about his actions both of judgment and resurrection. And the righteous, the wise, would learn righteousness. But wait a minute. But let grace be shown to the wicked, yet he will not learn righteousness. In the land of uprightness he will deal unjustly, and will not behold the majesty of the Lord. Lord, when your hand is lifted up, they will not see. But they will see and be ashamed. For their envy of the people, yes, the fire of your enemies shall devour them. Listen, folks, there's something remarkable here. And I want you to catch this. Even John Calvin saw this. Point number one, the subject, the context, is resurrection. The context is the salvation of Israel through resurrection. The time in which a song will be sung. We have in the Lord a strong city of salvation, whose walls are salvation. So it's not talking about literal physical Jerusalem, is it? The wall is salvation, or salvation is the wall for the redeemed. Salvation is the wall of this Jerusalem under consideration. So when these judgments of salvation, resurrection, but again, of judgment. On the one hand, the righteous will see, Lord, when your hand is lifted up. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, anytime you see the terminology in the Old Testament about God's hand coming down or God's hand being lifted up, pardon me, it's a good news, bad news thing. It's good news for the righteous. It's really bad news for the unrighteous. So here we're talking about a time of resurrection, pardon me, a time of salvation and a time of judgment. When the righteous would see that, Lord, when your judgments are in the earth, the inhabitants of the world will learn righteousness. So when God would act in judgment, when God would act in this resurrection salvation, the righteous would see what was happening and know it was God at work. But this is what you've got to catch. It was stunning. And like I said, John Calvin said, the wicked would view the actions of God and not understand that it was God at work. It's obviously a rough paraphrase, but the wicked would see the actions of God and not recognize that it was Yahweh at work until it was too late. Lord, when your judgment's in the earth, when your hand is lifted up, the wicked will not see. Oh, but they will see. And they'll be ashamed. So we have here the redemption of our body, i.e., resurrection of Romans 8:23. And Isaiah, in predicting that event, said when God's actions would be in the world, the righteous would see and know exactly what was taking place. The wicked would see the identical events that the righteous saw and said, this is the day of the Lord. This is the resurrection. But catch this. The wicked would see the same identical events that caused the righteous to go, it's the day of the Lord. This is Yahweh at work. This is the redemption of the body. And the wicked would go, what? I don't get it. Until it was too late for them. That's what John Calvin taught. They will see, they will know, or not know until it was too late. Now let me ask you a question, ladies and gentlemen. If the redemption of our body that Paul discusses is an earth-burning, cosmos-destroying, universal recreation of bugs, slugs, and mosquitoes, do you think that even the most ardent, hardcore atheist, unbeliever, do you think that even that most hardcore atheist could even possibly sit back and go, I don't think I understand what's going on here. What's going on? Don't you think that if the earth was being literally, physically, materially recreated in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, as Paul describes it in 1 Corinthians 15, don't you think even the most wicked, profligate, immoral, don't you think the worst person in the world would be able to go, whoa, oh no, oh no, oh no, I know what this is. But you see, Isaiah is very clear. Same event, witnessed by two groups of people. One group of people, the righteous, those who knew the Lord, who believed in him, obeyed him, and walked with him. They would see his actions and know this is the righteousness of God. The wicked, alive at the same time, seeing the same identical events, they would not see, that is to say, they would refuse to see until it was too late for them. So let me pose that question again. If you have a Christian standing beside a non-Christian, and all of a sudden, boom, Jesus comes out of heaven as a 5'5" Jewish man riding on a physical cumulus cloud with an audible shout, with an audible trumpet, and literal physical creation is swoosh, all of a sudden redeemed, transformed. Are you telling me that atheist would not know what was going on? That's the power of this text, ladies and gentlemen. So I ask you, if N.T. Wright's view of the redemption of our body, if the redemption of creation, bugs, slugs, and mosquitoes, if what Paul was teaching is what N.T. Wright says he was teaching, how does Isaiah 26 fit into that? And how would it be possible for the righteous to see the physical redemption, destruction, and redemption of all material creation, while the wicked sees the same thing and would not understand what was going on? It's kind of like the question, how is this possible, that I've already posed to you? Because the folks at Thessalonica, the folks in Ephesus, 2 Timothy chapter 2, believed that the resurrection, i.e. the redemption of our body, had already taken place. So I ask you, I would ask N.T. Wright, how could anybody convince anybody, and how could anybody believe that what N.T. Wright believes about the redemption of the body, of our body, had already taken place? You know, and I know, no one could convince anyone that N.T. Wright's view of the redemption of our body, the redemption of material physical creation, had already taken place. Thank you for joining me for this morning's morning musings. If you want to see my exegesis of the redemption of creation, get a copy of my book, Like Father, Like Son, on Clouds of Glory. Go to my website, donkpreston.com, bibleprophecy.com. Go to the bookstore, just look for the title, Like Father, Like Son, on Clouds of Glory. Order the book. Pardon me. Send me a note that says you saw the offer in my review of N.T. Wright's view on redemption of creation, and I'll refund your shipping. That'll save you $5. Okay? Thanks so much for joining me for this morning musings. Now then, got a special treat for you. As you know, probably, I did a 2021 or 21 video series in review and refutation of the book by Kyle Pope. The book was entitled Thinking About 80/70. And like I said, I produced 20 or 21 videos on that. Well, Brother Pope has now produced a 2-hour plus video responding to my 21 videos. Tomorrow morning, on a Saturday no less, okay, I have produced the first of what will undoubtedly be several videos refuting a refutation. Be looking for it on the flip side, on Saturday. I'll see you there.